Carlos Martinez goes first. Carlos is an independent researcher and political activist based in London. His first book, and by the way, Sarah mentioned this in her speech, and I should say that we in the manifesto stole the expression from Carlos' book, the title of Carlos's book, which is at the end of the socialism, was just the end of the beginning. Carlos's book is called The End of the Beginning, Lessons of the Soviet Collapse, which was published in 2019. His main area of research is the construction of socialist societies, past and present, and he co-edits with Keith Bennett, who you heard earlier, Friends of Socialist China, and is a co-founder of No Cold War. So Carlos, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Radhika. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating today. Now I'm sharing a panel with a large number of people who know significantly more than me about geopolitics. And therefore, I'm going to limit my remarks to a particular area, which is the question of climate change and environmental questions in general, how they're covered in the manifesto and the developments that have taken place in the last year since the manifesto was released. So the manifesto talks of an ecological emergency of climate warming, pollution, and biodiversity loss, rendering our planet increasingly uninhabitable. And it points the blame for this situation directly at neoliberal capitalism, which has, quote, turned everything the earth offers humanity gratis into plunder and profit. And I'm afraid to say that in terms of what neo-capitalism has been doing, this analysis still holds entirely true. Indeed, the situation is in many ways worse than it was a year ago, in spite of a great deal of rhetoric and the passing into US law 2 months ago of the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes climate commitments that Joe Biden considers to be sort of the landmark success of his presidency to date. And it is unquestionably the US's most important set of climate commitments thus far. Unfortunately, that's not really saying very much, and it's still nowhere near the type of unprecedented action the world needs from the US, which of all the major countries has the highest per capita emissions in the world, and which has contributed a full quarter to global cumulative carbon emissions, in spite of having just 4% of the world's population. Even if the US meets its targets under the Inflation Reduction Act, which is pretty doubtful, let's face it, then in 5 years' time, it will still be generating significantly less renewable energy than China will generate this year. But anyway, it's more fruitful to look at what the US and its allies are actually doing, as opposed to what they say they're doing or what they will do. Most obviously, the US is driving NATO's proxy war against Russia, which is nothing short of disastrous in environmental terms. In order to punish Russia, to consolidate the Western military, economic, ideological alliance, and to generate profits for the US's domestic fossil fuel industry, the Biden administration has been heavily promoting sanctions on Russian gas and pushing Europe towards reducing its reliance on Russian energy in the long term. You might hope that at least that might mean some sort of commitment to renewable energy. It doesn't. It actually means, one, a major increase in US exports of fracked shale gas to Europe, two, a return to coal for much of Central Europe, three, ramped up drilling for oil in the North Sea, four, a renewed interest in fracking in Britain and elsewhere. All of these are significantly more damaging in environmental terms than using Russian natural gas. Hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, is an unproven and likely extremely dangerous technology which potentially causes earthquakes, water pollution, and serious leaks of methane, which has 40 times the greenhouse effect that carbon dioxide does. And even if everything goes according to plan, well, shale gas is still a fossil fuel. And to get it from North America to Europe, it has to be liquefied, stored at minus 70 degrees Celsius, and then transported by ship. Obviously, this whole process is extremely costly, both in financial terms and in energy terms, certainly much more so than using existing pipelines that are running from Russia through Europe. Meanwhile, Germany, for decades a poster child of the renewable energy movement, has started reopening its coal mines. Its coal use is up 17% on last year, corresponding to a decrease in natural gas imported from Russia. As most people know, coal is the worst of the fossil fuels, associated with twice the carbon emissions of natural gas. And if there isn't enough farce and irony in this whole story so far? Well, it's precisely the German Green Party that's most hawkishly pushing these policies as part of their overall anti-Russia strategy. As is so often the case, the expression that comes to mind is, thank goodness for the existence of the People's Republic of China. A couple of months after the release of the manifesto last year, China announced some historic commitments, achieving peak greenhouse gas emissions before 2030 and reaching carbon neutrality by 2060. This is entirely in line with what the US and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have recommended for developing countries, and will constitute by far the fastest transition away from fossil fuels for an industrialized country. And, let's face it, China is generally in the habit of keeping its promises. It already looks like it will hit peak emissions before 2030, and it's already exceeding its targets for renewable energy generation. Coal has gone from 80% of China's power mix 20 years ago to under 50% now. That's actually a smaller proportion of the power mix than in Australia, obviously a rich and advanced country. The Belt and Road is getting greener and greener, with coal projects cut out and with a big emphasis on renewables. Actually, China is responsible for a third of all renewable energy investment globally. It's the world leader in electric buses, world leader in electric trains, world leader in electric cars. It's by far the global leader in the installation, generation, and consumption of solar power, wind power, hydropower. No country's done as much as China in terms of reforestation and afforestation. In the last 4 decades, forest coverage has doubled from 12% to 24%. Now, what allows this progress, of course, is the class structure of Chinese society, in which power isn't
Carlos, you just froze.
Green New Deal, which seems, completely marginal, sort of pie in the sky in this radical left idea in the West, is pretty close to what's actually happening in China. Unlike the US, unlike Britain, unlike the EU or Canada or Australia, China spends significantly more on renewable energy and environmental protection than it does on its military. Meanwhile, as the rich countries continue to fail to meet their commitment agreed in Copenhagen 13 years ago to provide $100 billion annually in climate finance to poorer countries, China in that same time has conducted hundreds of foreign assistance programs related to climate change adaptation and mitigation, and it's helped to build hydropower, solar and wind power stations in dozens of countries around the world, particularly the developing world, particularly the global south. All of this serves to highlight, among other things, the utter recklessness and short-sightedness of the new Cold War. If the US genuinely cared about protecting the planet and saving humanity, it would do everything possible to cooperate with China on climate change, learn from its example, benefit from its innovations. But actually it does the opposite. In support of its slander campaign regarding human rights in Xinjiang, it's imposing sanctions on Chinese products, including essential components for solar power. The people might want a Green New Deal, but what they're getting is better dead than red. It's difficult to avoid the conclusion that, in the interest of the survival of our species, the peoples of the world need to follow the example of the socialist countries to follow humanity's trajectory through pluripolarity to socialism. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.